This is Crappy to Happy, and I am your host, Cass Dunn. I'm a clinical and coaching psychologist, a mindfulness meditation teacher, and of course, author of the Crappy to Happy books. In this show, I bring you conversations with interesting, inspiring, intelligent people who are experts in their field and who have something of value to share that will help you feel less crappy and more happy. Jodi Rodgers is a qualified sexologist, counsellor and special education teacher with 30 years of experience in the industry. She established her private counselling practice, Birds and Bees, to provide relationship and sexuality counselling that is accessible for everyone. She is passionate that all people should have the right to access services that are inclusive of different communication and learning styles. You may know Jodi as she was featured as the relationship counsellor on the award-winning TV show Love on the Spectrum, which is now available on Netflix. She has also just published her first book, which is called Unique, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, and will be published with the title How to Find a Four-Leaf Clover, if you are in the USA or the UK. Jodi Rodgers, such a pleasure to have you on the Crappy to Happy podcast. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on.
Jodi, I would say that being featured on a top-rating Netflix series and now writing a book are certainly career highlights for anybody. But first and foremost, you are a counsellor and a sexologist, specifically working with people with disabilities. That's your day job. So can you please share, I would love to hear, I guess, a bit about your journey and what led you to doing this work.
My career started in teaching. So I was a special education teacher. And at that point, sort of in the 1980s, late 1980s, when I was working in a high school that was a segregated high school, and there was a really big focus on, employment after people finish school or, daily living skills. And I just was really conscious that there was not a lot of talk about adult relationships and intimacy and sexuality, particularly for people with disabilities. So it was just something that I was sort of always aware of. But then I started noticing just simple things, Cass, like, I can remember a student lost a parent while I was teaching, and there's no access to grief counselling for them. They were a person with an intellectual disability, and so there wasn't access to that. I think when we talk about access for people with disabilities, we forget that access isn't just about ramps. It's, access to information. And for me, having access to sexuality education and relationship counselling became fundamentally important. So I never planned it. I didn't wake up, in my 20s going, oh, yes, I'm going to be a sexologist and relationship counsellor. It wasn't like that. It just was, life just led me along this path, and I just sort of put my money where my mouth is, basically got the qualifications to do that and set myself up in private practice thinking maybe I'd give myself 6 months to see if it was a needed thing, and I just haven't looked back.
Yeah, wow. I love that it's just a case of just following that curiosity and it eventually leading to where you are now. I think that's a great story. So, Jodi, in the series, Love on the Spectrum, that focused specifically on people on the autism spectrum. But the work you do, I assume, is broader than that? Or do you specifically work with people with autism?
No. I work with any single person that may communicate differently or learn differently or have a difference in the way that they process their senses. So I work with cognitive disability, people with acquired brain injury, people with acquired physical disabilities, autistic people, any person that needs to have counselling and therapy modified to match their individual communication and learning needs.
Yeah. And Jodi, specifically talking about relationships, you highlight some of this, obviously on the TV show Love on the Spectrum, which has obviously captivated people. But what are some of the challenges that they face? What is the key work that you're doing with people in terms of relationships and sexuality?
If we're talking specifically about autistic people, There's a lot of difficulty just in developing relationships for autistic people. That's a huge generalisation because we have to remember that autism presents very, very differently across the whole spectrum. But, some of the things we see is people might have a lot of social anxiety and have difficulties initiating relationships with other people, or they may have difficulty understanding the reciprocity of relationships, the back and forth that we all have to do in relationships. People can have very specific expectations of other people. And as we know, expectations are really complex in relationships. And just communication, like when you think about it, intimate romantic relationships, and when we talk intimacy, we're really talking about not just physical intimacy, but emotional intimacy, the capacity to be highly vulnerable. Another person takes a lot of trust. And for many autistic people, that's quite difficult to develop a level of trust with another person where they feel they can really be their authentic selves.
And it's so necessary. That's the thing that's been highlighted, I think, is that relationships and belonging and connection is a fundamental human need. And that's the work you're doing, isn't it? It's like it is a human right. It should be accessible to everybody, regardless of differences. I think that's what's really been highlighted in the TV series. It's just done. I feel I'd love to hear your thoughts, but it has done such a good job of portraying the humanity. Of these people are no different from the rest of us. They want the same things that we want.
I think that is one of the most remarkable things that came out of the series, Cass, because when it first aired, so many people were saying, but I experienced that, I am anxious when I go on a date, or I desperately want a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a partner. And I think that people looked at autism as being something so removed from themselves. And I think the relatability of the show actually saying, hang on, every single person wants this. And it may not be that every single person wants a life partner, but every single person needs to have connection with other people. We all need it. And we do it in very, very different ways. But I think that that's where a lot of the success from the show came from, because people just sitting in their lounge room all of a sudden went, oh, right, I get it. It allowed people, opened people's eyes up to autism, but I think it opened people's eyes up to just, we're all pretty similar. We're all seeking the same thing.
Exactly. And I think the thing that really struck me too was, I know you said about how it can be really difficult to be vulnerable and have that trust, but I just loved some of the sheer honesty, like the no filter with some of the people on the show on the autism spectrum. Like it's kind of refreshing to have that level of truth being expressed, because the rest of us are all just, bloody trying to pretend or something, put on a show, and they're just like, no, this is how it is and this is how I feel. I just loved it. I feel like there should be more of that. It's one of
the best things. Well, one of the great things, I mean, I've learnt many, many things from a lifetime hanging out with autistic people, but the autistic people just say it as it is. And neurotypical people, we do a lot of dancing around each other, this social dance around each other. And autistic people are very good at just saying it exactly as it is, because they don't really get the social nuance of why we do that. Sometimes I've had clients come to it, they're perplexed. They'll say, but if you don't like somebody, why don't you just say you don't like somebody? Or why do people ghost each other? Why would people just say, it was nice to meet you, sorry, no thanks? They just don't get the way that we do this crazy social dance around each other.
Yeah, I think we could all learn something.
Difference. Yeah, and there's a big difference in saying, being honest, the way that you could see autistic people being honest with what they're saying, and being vulnerable. Being vulnerable is when you truly open yourself up emotionally to somebody else. There's a big difference in those two things, but the honesty is phenomenal. And but it also sometimes can be honest in a way that can make things difficult. So, if you went on a first date and the first thing you said to somebody was, oh, you've got a massive pimple on your chin, or, your breath smells, haven't you brushed your teeth? There's also honesty that can be, we know sometimes not to say the things inside of our head.
Yes.
So that can cause some difficulties as well for people.
So how do you go about teaching that to somebody, Jodi? Like in your work, like how do you teach somebody who's just like, well, why wouldn't you just say that? How to draw that line and make that distinction between what's okay to say out loud and what's not?
The way I explain it sometimes to people is that I feel often in my work I'm a translator. So just like if somebody was a hearing person but they were, fluent in sign language, and then they are able to translate from a deaf person to a hearing person, they're the middle person. I feel that's a little bit like my job, and a lot of my work is actually translating why neurotypical people do the things they do, or what a neurotypical person will expect in terms of our body language and our gestures and our communication, what our expectations are. And a lot of my work is translating that for an autistic person, so then they can actually go, oh, I get it. They might go, why? That's weird. But it's sort of a back and forth translation.
Yeah.
Really, I often feel like that's my job, is sort of supporting an autistic person to understand a neurotypical person's way of moving through the world, and then on the other hand supporting neurotypical people to understand that autistic people are just doing it a little bit differently.
Obviously, this whole landscape has changed significantly in the time that you've been working in this field, Jodi. I mean,
definitely.
Now it feels like, I know it's not the case, but it feels like almost every other person, particularly adult and adult women, being diagnosed, and that with some sort of neurodiversity, and that being almost like revelationary, like people suddenly their whole life kind of makes sense. I guess, what are some of the shifts and the changes that you've seen over the course of 20 years? 30 years.
Yeah, I know. I try, and it's not even Botox. Well, we've got to remember that, we're pretty dumb when it comes to our neurology. Like we're really only beginning to understand how our minds work. And so when I first started in this field, any person that got a diagnosis with autism had to also have an intellectual disability.
Oh, wow.
So to really, back then in the 80s and 90s, it was, if you had a physical disability or you had an intellectual disability. But we really weren't looking at people's social, the way they interacted socially, or how people's, regulated their emotions, or we didn't really look at that. And so what's happened during the course of my lifetime in this area is that we've actually started going, oh, hang on, people do interact in different ways, or they process things differently, or they, have a specific need for sameness, or so it's shifted in that way. I think we've begun to understand much more about how the human mind actually works, which is brilliant. I personally think that at some point, probably not in my lifetime, but at some point, we may not actually use the language that we use now of autism, or, this person's got obsessive compulsive disorder, or this person has, this or this. I think that we'll, in some point in our future, they'll probably just, scan our brains and they'll say, oh, Cass, yes, you prefer to do things in this way. You're a little bit rigid in your thinking in this, or, your emotional regulation is in this way, or, I think that they will see that neurodivergence is, they'll look at it differently. I just believe it'll be looked at in a very, very different way.
Yeah.
And I think particularly because diagnostically, so it was really only in the 1990s that we started saying, oh, hang on, you can be autistic but not have an intellectual disability. So that gave a massive shift in diagnosis because then we had at that point was called Asperger's, which is now just called autism level 1. But we started rethinking that you could be, of average intelligence to extremely bright, but you could also be autistic. So a lot of people don't know that. In Australia, we actually only started thinking about autism, high function, that sort of, Asperger's level 1 autism as being a disability in 2005. So before that, people couldn't even access anything that was available. And then the shifts happened again. So I love it. I love watching the shifts happen. And one of the shifts that has been very conscious of, that it was always kind of boys. Yeah. And they used to say, it was 4-to-1 boys. That was the old scale that they used to talk about. But that was because diagnostically, boys were presenting much more easily. It would be the boy in school who just couldn't sit still, and I'm talking about children that didn't have an intellectual disability. So then it shifted because we were only looking at the presentation of what a boy would do, a man would do. But now we're going, hang on, women actually do this differently. So it's just been another shift in understanding our neurology and how our neurology works.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it does sound like, people say that, but everybody's got autism. No, not everybody has autism. It's just that we're starting to understand human neurology way better than we ever did.
Yeah.
And we will continue to understand human neurology every single month, every year. We'll get a better understanding of ourselves.
Yeah, it's on a bit of a path at the moment, isn't it, where there's this balance between people who, really value having that understanding of, this is why I've always struggled with this, or this is why I've always, done things this particular way. Like, it makes so much sense. Balanced against the rest of the population going, well, I'm a bit like that too. Like, what have we all got? ADHD, and kind of trivializing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the complexity, because people will say, oh, everybody's a little bit on the spectrum. No, we're not. It's an autism spectrum, and you have to present, it has to be in the areas that they're looking at diagnostically, which at the moment they look at 7 different areas, and you have to struggle. You have to have difficulty, and it's got to be clinical. It can't be, I'm disorganised. Oh, yeah, well, that's a little bit autistic. No, it's not a little bit autistic. I'm just disorganised. There is specific things. If you are autistic, you are struggling in your day-to-day world. You are struggling and really need support, and you really need help. And it may be that you're struggling in your relationships. It may be that you're struggling in having employment. It may be that you're struggling because you can't actually be out in a crowd or process, sensory information is just overwhelming. But it's not everybody's a little bit on the spectrum. We're not.
Yeah.
We're all on the human spectrum.
Exactly.
We're all different and we all do things differently, but we're definitely not all autistic.
I think, similarly with ADHD, everyone, I'm disorganised, I'm unfocused. What does that mean? I've got ADHD. It's the same sort of thing, isn't it? And I feel like sometimes those people that have done such a stellar job of masking, just in order to fit in for so long, that people sometimes don't realise how much they've been struggling.
And I don't think, and they don't, and we don't, I 100% agree with you, Cass. And I think that's when somebody makes a flippant comment like that, I say, but do you know the dark side of this? Do you know the hardship of having ADHD? Did you struggle in school? Were you so hyper-focused in one area that the rest of your life slipped away into chaos? Do you understand that this isn't just something we can talk about by saying, I'm a bit disorganised or I get easily distracted? That is not ADHD. It's not. And so I think we have to remember it's beautiful. I love the fact that we've got communities of people who are talking about autism with deep pride. And I love that because it's about celebrating our differences. But we also have to remember that before people can speak with pride, there has to be a lot of courage and bravery, because there has been many, many, many years of those people where they have been overlooked and bullied and isolated. So it's very courageous, the people speaking up now.
Yeah. When you say that the things are shifting and our awareness is growing, and as it will, I agree with you. Like, it seems to just be, there's this explosion at the moment, and it'll continue in our understanding of these differences. How do you feel about the term disability versus difference? Because I know that even some people will even say, well, why do we have to consider that somebody whose brain operates this way is disabled versus, will they just process information differently? What's your thoughts on that?
Language is so complex because I have seen language change dramatically. So, you know, at one point we always said, oh yeah, they're a disabled person. And then it was, they're a person with a disability. And now it's shifting again to say, no, disabled person, because people will take pride in saying, well, that's part of my identity. You know, I think we're all different. So when we talk about people with differences, well, there's 8 billion plus of us, and we're all different. And it is a difference, but I think we have to, the word disability, when it is that person's identity, then it's basically saying it's not that they have the disability, it's that society has created the disability because of their difference from the majority. So, but I'm very clued into, you know, I'm a therapist, Cass, so every single individual that sits in front of me tells me who they are. And so their identity, whether it's their gender identity or their sexual orientation or the way they think about the world or how they choose to call themselves, whether they call themselves a person with a disability or a disabled person, whatever language they want to use, I will use that language too, because that it's not up to me to tell another person what words fit them. It's up to the person to tell me what words fit them. Yeah. That probably didn't answer your question.
No, I think that's fair. I think, you know, following somebody's lead is the important thing. I think that we can get tripped up, you know, we can get afraid to say the wrong thing or who are we going to offend. And I think that's a good point, you know. Well, depending on who you're talking to, then maybe, you know, follow their lead in terms of the language that they use. I just know that I did a session, and I'm not an expert on neurodiversity, but I was asked to run just a 1-hour session just covering some of these differences in a workplace. And there was somebody there who really had an opinion about just the use of the term, just even calling these things disabilities or disorders, you know, as opposed to just understanding these things as, you know, just a different way of processing. And I thought, yeah, I get that, but also there's a balance, isn't there? Also, other people need to understand that this is a challenge and this is a struggle for whatever reason, and that sometimes that allowances and accommodations might need to be made. And maybe that is because we've always done it badly, catering for the neurotypical. But in the present day, that's still the reality.
And it is very, very difficult because the cultural shift to happen, it takes time, and it takes people listening, and then it takes the shift of language. So, you know, I'm a sexologist who's also been a sexologist for quite a while. And so I had to go through and learn all about pronouns and the huge spectrum of gender identity and, you know, the sexuality identity. That took me time. And it wasn't saying I was somebody going, oh, no. It just took me time because I was going through a cultural shift. And sometimes it takes generations for cultural shift to happen and language to shift and change. And it also depends on environments, Cass. So if you walk into a medical facility and you're talking to people who are working within psychiatry and psychiatrists, then they're still working under a medical system where disorder is part of the language of the medical language. If you're talking about an area where you're thinking about social, the social construct of disability, then people would not use the word disorder because they'd say that's medical. They'd use disability. If you are hanging out with my mates down the street, then I would never even say disability because it's not even part of what they are in my lifetime. So it also depends on the environment you're in. As we know, anywhere on the planet where you go into a new culture, there's a different language and we can sometimes get it wrong.
Yeah.
But what we need to do is help people. I bugger up all the time, constantly buggering up. And so what I love best is when somebody says, "Oh, no, you don't say that, Jodie." "Oh, how come?" But not to chastise me. I don't want somebody to chastise me when I get it wrong. I want them to help me understand so that then I can get it right. And I think we just need to do that for one another.
Yeah, I like that. Jodie, you've just published your first book called Unique.
Yes.
Again, I've started to read it. I'm loving it. I haven't finished it yet. But what I love also about your book is the same thing we were talking about earlier, in that these stories that you share and how they so beautifully express that these people that we call disabled are not that much different to the rest of us. You've done such a beautiful job. Can you tell me about the book and what inspired the book?
Well, it's funny, because I had never thought about being a writer. It just wasn't in my, I've done a lot of academic writing because of the qualifications, but I never thought, oh yeah, I'll write a book, because I love people and in my job I hang out with people all day long. So I never really, to me, writers spend a lot of time by themselves, being, deep in their own heads. But I have always been a storyteller, always. And I use stories when I'm training. I use stories with my family. I use stories with my friends. I use stories if I'm running workshops. And I use stories with clients. And I use story all the time to try and help people have greater understanding and greater empathy for other people. So if I'm in a workshop and somebody says, "Oh, what about this, Jodie?" A whole workshop, 5 hours, could be taken up with me going, "Well, let me just tell you a story about," because I think story allows us to say, "Oh, okay, I can feel it too." And so really the book, that's what I really wanted the book to do. I wanted to take all of these stories that were in my head and I wanted to get them out as a way of saying, hang on, when you see somebody do something that is so different, when it makes you ponder or it makes you frustrated or agitated or you're just thinking, hell is going on here, I just wanted to tell some stories to go, let me give you a little bit of insight into what you may be seeing, and it's not so dissimilar to something you may have experienced. And that's really what I was hoping to do, Cass.
Oh, well, you've done it brilliantly, and you are a fabulous storyteller, but a great writer. I mean, it's really well written. It really is.
Yeah, thank you.
And I was reading it going, oh yeah, I can see myself in that. You just, obviously it's up to the people listening to go and get the book to read it, but I will just say that it's really well done, the way that you present an individual with some sort of difference or some sort of behavior that you might be going, well, what the hell's that? Like you just said. And then you, as you keep reading, you go, oh, actually, yeah, I do that. I might do it in a different way, but I do that. I get put off by that in that sort of a situation, or, I can see myself in that. And it just creates so much more empathy and just understanding when you can see that there's actually quite a lot of similarity.
Yeah. And it's been incredible for me because I think a lot of the book I'm also trying to say that it's what autistic people have taught me about everybody else. So it's really interesting in my lifetime now, I can see, I can be with a neurotypical person and they'll say, no, you've got to stack the dishwasher like this and be really, no, it has to be done like this. If you do it another way, where that could be frustrating to other people, I just look at them and able to say, oh yeah, that's their little system. There's a reason that they believe that the dishwasher has to be stacked like that. It may not be my idea, but it's theirs. Autistic people have systems all the time all the time, but they may not have the capacity to communicate to say, no, I need my dishwasher stacked like this. And, you know, we're all pretty interesting individuals. We're all pretty interesting in that way. But, when I was asked to write the book, it was really interesting that I thought somebody, said, why don't you write these stories down? And originally I thought, I'll have to write a guidebook. Am I writing a guidebook to this? And then it quickly came out that there was two things. One, I can't tell another person's story. I'm not an autistic person, so I would never, ever tell an autistic person's story. That's their story to tell. All I could tell is the story of what a lifetime listening to people who see the world in a different way and communicate in a different way, what a lifetime of that has actually taught me. That's what it's really about. And then the stories came out really pretty quickly, pretty fast and furious, which was interesting as well.
Yeah.
But writing was not fun for me, Cass.
Wasn't it?
No, there was moments where I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm so brilliant at this, but that would be brief. And then, what I loved probably most about the whole process was I was able to be reflective. I was able to go, oh yeah, remember when that happened? It gave me a lot of reflection, but I found it quite difficult. I never ever stopped seeing clients the whole time I wrote because I needed them.
Yeah.
I needed them, and that was something else. I realised how much my happiness comes from hanging out with people. And if it's just me and a computer or me and a bit of paper and a pen, I love the process, but it's not where I get my joy from. Yeah, so I'm not a natural writer. I'm a good storyteller, but I'm not a natural writer.
Well, you've done a really good job, let me just tell you. You've probably heard that already.
I'm just starting to have people read it, Cass, so I'm just starting to get feedback from people who've read it, and the things that people say to me, I'm like, that's not even what I would have thought. Like a guy, there's a story at the very, very beginning of the book about the first person I ever met with, she was a young autistic girl. I was only 18. She was 6, and the experience we had was in a swimming pool. And a person I met just this week said, when you wrote the line about the chlorine burning your nostrils, that I just was in that pool with you. And it's something that it's so funny because I hadn't even thought that I'd never even thought about any of those parts, that I was trying really to get people in the picture with me as well, with us.
Interesting, because I did too. I was right there in that pool. I could feel it. I could feel the heat of it. I could smell it. So that's a skill. Yeah.
It is a skill. Maybe I am a writer. Maybe I've shocked myself. It's weird, isn't it? I'm about to have a book published and it's getting published internationally, and I'm still sitting here to you saying, no, I'm not really a writer. I don't think it's sunk in yet. Buddy.
So, Jodi, in your day-to-day work, you said that you are a counsellor. This is the community that you particularly work with. You also run workshops. Who do you run workshops for?
I run workshops. So I run sexuality workshops for adults with intellectual disabilities. So they're really fun to have 30 to 40 adults with intellectual disabilities in one room for a full day, because I have big expectations that, no, this is a day workshop. You're going to hang out for the day. And I do a lot of education around sexuality and consent and what sex is. And because, as we know, the statistics of sexual abuse and assault are significant for people within the disability community. So I run workshops like that. I run workshops for professionals and, I don't know, anybody who wants me to talk, Cass, really. Just, broader education for the community.
Yeah, no, it's good for people to know, people who are listening, it's good for them to know what the services are that you offer, because they might want to call you up and have you come and run a workshop.
Tell a few stories.
Tell a few stories, exactly. They'll be entertained. Entertained and educated. So how did the Love on the Spectrum thing come about? Did somebody just ring you up one day, Jodi, and say, hey?
Yeah, it was very random.
And what were your thoughts? Well, I would love to know what your initial reaction was.
My first initial reaction was no. So when I was contacted, and it was one of those things where somebody had told somebody else about me, kind of thing, and then I was contacted by the production team, Northern Pictures, who are a brilliant production team. But my first reaction internally was to go, no way in hell am I going to be on the TV. That's ridiculous. And there's a couple of reasons for it. You know, one, Cass, I never wanted to be on the TV. And the second one is that I'm a counsellor. And so part of counselling, the true part of counselling is you can have every single theoretical understanding. You know, you could have studied all components of I'm trying to say, just, you know, counselling theory. You can have all of that. You can be a genius. But the greatest thing about counselling is having a genuine relationship with the person in front of you. Because when the relationship's genuine, it's professional, but when it's genuine, then you can interact with each other in a way that is very real. And for me to go, why would I go on telly and be filmed doing something that to me I hold in the highest regard? That therapeutic relationship I hold very, very highly. So in my mind, I thought, no way in hell, because I won't have a genuine relationship with these people. Weirdly, Cass, saying that, every single person, so Michael, who I'm on the show with, he and I have been friends now for 5 years.
Wow.
Teo and I have been friends for 3.5 years. I maintain friendships with every single, because I requested that as well. I said, if I'm on this show with these people, then they need to know that any point after the show, I'm in their lives, not as a professional, just in their life. And yeah, that's been maintained with everybody. But yeah, so I said, my initial reaction was no, but they talked me into it. And they talked me into it basically by saying, it'll be 5 minutes, one episode, one season. So I thought, all right, I'll do 5 minutes. But, you know, people don't understand. Well, I didn't understand. They film you for 5 hours to edit to 5 minutes. So you have to put a great deal of trust in the production company as well, because you have no idea what they're going to edit that 5 hours into.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That would, if somebody had approached me, that would always be my concern. Like, how do I know how this is going to come across in the edited version? Because there's so much that people don't see.
I was really scared.
Yeah.
I was really scared because I knew enough to know that with anybody I was with, that we had been mic'd up and filmed for many, many hours. And so and then I didn't know what they were going to do with it. And I think because I was living in, you know, the Bachelor world, Love Island, you know, that we know what they do with that. So, but it's not reality television. It's a doco-series. It's nothing scripted. There was never any competition. We were never told what to say or not say. I met every single person for the first time when I knocked on their doors.
Really?
That's the first time I'd ever met any of them. None of us were paid to be on there because we're all being ourselves. There was no casting. It's just us.
Yeah.
And so it's genuine in that way. But yes, they did a great job.
Yeah, they did. You must have sensed that they were very pure in their intentions. They had good intentions in making the show.
Yeah, and one of the things I saw very quickly was the respect that the production company gave to the autistic people on that show and the support that was offered to them. And if any of the people on the show said, I want a break, it was given straight away. There was always checking in. Are you okay? Do you need this? It was very, very respectful. And so because I saw that, I also knew that what they were wanting to do was, they really wanted to educate the community on autism, but they wanted to do it in a way that would hook people in. And I think that they got it right. Went, hang on, we're all into this dating at the moment. These dating apps are going wild. Everybody's interested. So it was like wanting to give a presentation of autistic people to a big, wide community, but they really, if it had been, let's do a show on transport training and people catching a bus, it just wouldn't have had the same hook.
No.
It was the hook that got people in because we've all experienced it. We all know it.
I was going to ask, how much time did you actually get to spend with the people on the show, and were you actually able to do genuine work, because we only see this little 5-minute snippet.
Oh yeah, definitely. So hours and hours, and there'd be build up to that. Was really funny because I can remember I don't know if you've seen the part of the show, Cass, but there's Kelvin, who's a really great friend of mine now, and he lives with his dad, and they're a Chinese family, a male household with just the two of them. And so when I went to the house, what people saw was me working with Kelvin to say when somebody enters the date, they saw a snippet of it. And the feedback for that was, Jodie's trying to teach neurotypical social skills, and why the hell is she getting him to pull out the chair and stuff like that? What people didn't see was the discussion of them about their culture of respect to women. And, that's the thing. People only get to see this minute thing. And if people haven't experienced being on television or know what editing's like, even audio editing, people think that you just get filmed for that 5 minutes. And that's the reality. It's not the reality. Any reality television is not reality.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I was with them, and that was the beautiful thing because I was filmed with them. I got to, follow up with them, and then it became friendships. So, I have maintained friendships. Actually, I caught up with Michael and Teo just yesterday. We were hanging out together in Sydney. So
that's cool.
Yeah, it's lovely.
That's
cool.
It's
really, really lovely.
Yeah. Such rewarding work, Jodi. I feel like it just must be such. I mean, I do counselling and stuff as well, and coaching, but so I know, but it seems like you must really love your job, because it seems like very rewarding work.
Yeah, well, if you're a counsellor, you know this, Cass. If you're a counsellor and you didn't like your work, you shouldn't be doing it. You shouldn't be there. You have to really love people. You have to be really curious about people, and you have to have a belief that every single person on the planet has good in them, and that we're all striving to be our best selves. And some of us just need a little bit more help.
Yeah.
We need to connect with each other. So sometimes a counsellor or psych or sometimes there can be the only people that people tell their whole truth to.
Exactly.
And it can be very liberating to tell your whole truth to somebody. Yeah, but no, I am very, very, very lucky.
Yeah, you've found your calling, that's for sure, and you found it at a young age by the sound of it. Jodi, I really congratulations on all of it, and I just think it's such good work that you're doing, and it's just so lovely to see the level of education and awareness being raised in the wider community, and you've done a really great job of contributing to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Cass. That's lovely. Thank you.
You can find out more about Jodi's work at her website, birdsandbees.com.au. Her brand new book, Unique, is out next week in Australia. You can pre-order it right now. Love on the Spectrum, of course, is available on Netflix. It is really heartwarming television. I recommend it if you haven't tuned in already. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sending me your messages on Instagram about what you would like to hear on the podcast. Always really open and interested in your input. And I can't wait to catch you next week for another episode of Crappy to Happy.